Okay, good afternoon. I think I know many people who would be watching this from the Council of Deans. I sat on the Council of Deans executive um, in the distant past. My name's Hugh McKenna, and I'm going to talk to you today about REF 2029 and why it's important for you to know a little bit about REF 2029. Um, I was a panel chair for nursing and midwifery in 2008, and I was a panel chair for nursing, midwifery, dentistry, pharmacy, allied health professions, and also biomedical science. That was in 2014, and I was chair for the same panel in 2021. For 2029, I'm a member of the RDAP panel, which is the Research Diversity Advisory Panel. More about that in the presentation. Here's what I hope to go through in the next 35 to 40 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between 2021 and 2029 regarding REF, and then I'm going to talk about contribution to knowledge and understanding, CKU, which was outputs in old money. And I then will talk about engagement and impact, which in old money was impact, and PCE, which is people, culture and environment, which was environment back in 2021 and 2014. And I finish off with some issues around research diversity. This presentation, there's a caveat for you. It's based on what is currently in the public domain. The plans for REF 2029 are ongoing. They're currently being developed further. So we won't know the real um, plans and processes for 2029 REF probably until later this year. Perhaps at that stage, I'll come back and do another presentation. Okay, research assessment's getting to be a global phenomenon. You can see here the countries that currently have a research assessment process. Australia and New Zealand have paused theirs, I think, to see what we're going to do with REF 2029 in the UK. But all the others are working away at assessing research. And I noticed yesterday that Ireland is just produced a new document looking at the use of metrics in research assessment. So it's a global phenomenon. Why is that? Well, this slide might help you to understand that. Governments across the world fund research in universities. So this money is coming from the taxpayer, the public purse. It's a duty on the government to ensure that that money is well spent, because it's taxpayers' money. And therefore, they want to target the money at research quality. They would not want to give money to a university to research that was not good quality. And that also means that the research undertaken in universities have to be impactful. In other words, must have a social or economic or health impact. And this means that they need a way of finding out where the good research is being done and targeting money in that direction, hence research assessment exercises. So in the UK, the first exercise was in 1986, and it takes place about 5 to 7 years between one and the next one. So in 2021 and 2001 and 2008, it was called the research assessment exercise. And at that stage, we looked at outputs, which are mainly publications when it comes to the panel that you would be interested in. But also there was research environment, which covers grants and staffing policies and PhD completions and funding, etc. And there was also research esteem. And that's what the research assessment exercise looked like in 2001 and 2008. Then in 2014 and 21 and 29, it was renamed the Research Excellence Framework. And in 2014, this included data on research impact, research outputs and environment. And that was the same in REF 2021. And the submissions that universities make are scored by panels, and the results determine the allocation of government research funding. And how much that funding is? Well, Each year, the UK government allocates £2 billion, a little bit more than it, but around about £2 billion to universities across the UK. And the allocation of that money is determined by how those particular universities did in the research excellence framework. Those that did well get more of that money. Those that didn't do well get less of that money. But that that £2 billion also levers in money from other sources. So if you're able to do well in REF, you tend to also do well in accessing money from research councils, accessing money from major charities, from the framework program in EU, etc. And that brings, with the research councils, probably another 4 billion per year. And that's every year until the next REF. So why do we have this thing called REF? Well, partly is to allocate this block grant research funding, as you can see here, but also it's to provide accountability to those taxpayers out there that fund research in universities, to show them the benefits that their research funding is having. In other words, research impact. And it also provides insights into the health of research in UK universities. The money that we get from this QR money from the government is called non-hypothecated money or unhypothecated money. In other words, universities can spend it in any way they want. Um, so it may not necessarily be spent in research. It probably is in many cases. Does the money go to those researchers at the coalface that earn it? In some cases, that is the case. In some cases, it's not. But I understand that at the present time, Research England is looking closely at how they can um, provide some guidance on how this £2 billion should be spent on research and not on other things. But that's for another day. Okay, back in 2000, well, in early REF 2014, the outputs, in other words, publications, were worth 65%. Impact was worth 20%, and environment was worth 15%. And in environment, we had everything from, as I say, PhD completions to research strategy to strategy for staff to esteem to collaborations nationally and internationally to research funding, etc. So everything tended to be thrown into environment, only 15%. But that's a lot when you're thinking about the £2 billion. Okay, what happened the next year? Well, the next year it was 60%. This was in 2021. Outputs lost 5%, and that 5% went on to impact. There is a view that the Treasury wanted this to be much, much more than 25% because they're interested in economic impact and the bang that they get from the buck that they give to universities. But the sector probably wouldn't have accepted much more than 25% then. So 5% left outputs and went into impact. And environment stayed at 15%, covering all those things that I've already alluded to. Let's look at 2029. Big change. 2029 outputs have now come down from 60% to 50%. And actually, it's a little bit less than that, which I'll come to later. Uh, Impact has changed from impact to engagement and impact. It's still 25%. And people, culture, and environment has replaced environment, and it's gone up from 15% to 25%, showing the emphasis now on culture and research culture in particular. So the panel that, if you like, were the instigators of REF 2029, this was a panel chaired by Sir Peter Gluckman. Sir Peter Gluckman was a chief scientific officer in New Zealand, advising the New Zealand government. He chaired a panel called the FRAP panel, FRAP, and they wanted it to be 33 and a third, 33 and a third, and 33 and a third. But again, that probably was too much for some members of university sector to accept. So it's 50% for CKU, 25% for E&I, and 25% for PCE. Okay. So just to recap, this exercise is in place to allocate £2 billion of government funding, QR funding. QR means quality related funding to universities. And they look at three particular things. You can see here, people, culture, and environment is worth 25%. And that's split into an institutional level statement from the university and a disciplinary level statement from the unit of assessment. When it comes to research outputs, again, it's research outputs worth 50%, but that is also split across a disciplinary level evidence statement. And I'll come to that in more detail later. The impact case studies now have come to engagement and impact, and it is also split between the impact case studies and a disciplinary level statement. So for each of these three sections, there's now disciplinary level evidence statements, a narrative, if you like, qualitative and quantitative statement that will, if you like, enhance the evidence for the outputs, for the impact, and for the environment. Again, a quick overview of REF. There's 34 expert panels, and this is across 4 main panels. So you have main panel A, which is probably the one that you're interested in, and that's medical and life sciences. Main panel B is physical sciences and engineering. That includes computing, of course. Panel C is social sciences, and panel D is arts and humanities. And each of these panels has a number of sub-panels working towards it. So in main panel A, there are 6 sub-panels. And the one that you're particularly interested in, sub-panel 3, is the one that I'll spend most of the next few slides talking about. But each main panel has a chair, and all the chairs of the sub-panels sit on that main panel. There's also some international members and some research user representatives from research councils or indeed health service, etc. For the sub-panels, there's chair and deputy chair, panel members, and there's additional assessors that get taken in if required for assessing impact and assessing outputs. And there are 2 main, if you like, overarching panels. One is the People and Diversity Panel, PDAP, and one is the Research Diversity Advisory Panel, RDAP, which is the one that I sit on. There's also, just I'd remind you at this stage, that nominations close for sub-panel membership on the 20th of April. So if you're looking at this presentation before the 20th of April, you should consider putting yourself forward, because it's self-nominating. And that, again, that's a change from previous exercises. So you can self-nominate yourself to sit on sub-panel 3 as an expert panelist. Okay, here we are, an overview of the panels. So we've got 34 panels, and you can see main panel A, and in main panel A we have sub panel 3, and that's the one that covers nursing, midwifery, allied health professions, dentistry, and pharmacy. The criteria and the guidance are being worked on at the present time. As I mentioned earlier on, universities will make their submissions at the end of 2028, and the panels will go into gear to assess the outputs, assess the impact and engagement, and assess the people, culture, and environment. And they'll do that throughout 2029, and they will report back to Research England, and Research England will produce the end results to universities either at the very end of 2029 or the early 2030. Okay, now why the change from 2021 to 29? Well, I think it's common knowledge for quite a while, not just in the UK, but worldwide, that research culture is crucial to supporting good quality research activities, research outputs, research outcomes, and impact. So research culture is really important. I'll come to that in more detail later. We also know that previous REFs and REEs had a negative impact on individuals' careers. People did not get appointed. People did not get promoted in some universities because either they were not so-called returned in REF, or they did not do well in REF. So it had a negative uh, impact on individuals and their careers. Previous exercises did not recognize the contribution of those other people who make research possible. I'm talking about here about librarians, I'm talking about lab technicians, and all the other research enablers across a university, not just the academic staff. The academic staff may be submitting their papers, but the people who make that happen are the enablers of research. REF 2029 is going to do its best to recognize to a greater extent those individuals. And previous REFs had contributed to a publish or perish culture. And we know that. And this reduced diversity of outputs, and it reduced the research types that were done across universities. So that was, again, very negative. And of course, REF and previous exercise cost a great deal. And there was an increase in the cost of REF 2021 compared to REF 2014. And they want to ensure for REF 2029 that the administrative effort is proportionate to as great an extent as possible. There's also a need to ensure that even with the changes for REF29, is that the outputs or the outcomes of research remain rigorous and systematic. So I'm going to deal with contribution to knowledge and understanding. As I said, in old money, this was known as outputs. So let's take a look at this. So universities submitting to REF29 need to submit an average of 2.5 outputs for every research active member of staff. So what I mean by that is that if you had 20 people in your department that was going to be returned in REF 2029, you would need 50 outputs, 2.5 on average. Now, not all of those people may have an output. So there's no minimum. There was a minimum in 2021. You had to have one output at least. That's no longer the case. This might change, don't know, but at the moment there's no minimum and no maximum number of outputs. So of those 50 outputs from the 20 individual staff, it's possible that 10 staff could produce all 50 and the other 10 may produce none for all sorts of reasons. But still in all, those 20 people, if they're going to be part of the volume, will have to produce 50 outputs. So even if you don't have an output, if you research active, you will contribute to the volume measure. I hope that makes sense. And it also means you're going to contribute to the number of impact case studies, because the number of impact case studies that a submission returns will be calculated by the number of staff in that submission. And again, I'll come to that later. So there's a big emphasis here on breaking the link between individuals and outputs. So in past exercises, it was possible to say that Dr. Joe Bloggs returned the following 4 outputs, or Joe Bloggs in 2021 returned 5 outputs or 1 output. In 2029, there'll be no link between individuals and outputs. And this is part of the Stern recommendations that came into force in the late 2016, 2017, when it came to deciding on how best to undertake new exercises, that it was important to break the link between staff and outputs. And this may be also because many staff were treated negatively in terms of their career, simply because either they were not returned, or they were not returned with enough outputs, or they were returned with outputs that didn't do particularly well. So this is a very positive thing, I believe, divorcing staff from their outputs when it comes to the submission in REF. But there's a paradox here. The paradox is the aim of all the universities, and I think your PVC research would agree with this if you ask them, the aim is to return the highest scoring research possible for your university. Okay, but the aim of REF is to have a representation of the broadest range of research activity, the more diverse research activity across the university, in terms of outputs, in terms of impact, and in terms of culture. So there's a little bit of a paradox between those two aims. Here are the criteria for outputs. You can see that 4-star and 4-star outputs get more money than 3-star outputs, about 4 times as much money as 3-star outputs. 2-star outputs, 1-star outputs, and unclassified get no money. So only 3 and 4-star, at least that's the rules for 2021, and it doesn't appear to have changed for 2029, that funding based on the results of REF only went to 3 and 4-star, and 4-star was worth, as I say, 4 times more than 3-star. 4-star is world leading in terms of the 3 criteria of originality, significance, and rigor. 3-star is internationally excellent. 2-star is recognized internationally. And 1-star is nationally recognized, and unclassified is not research at all. So those are the criteria for judging outputs. So just to recap at this stage, when it comes to contribution to knowledge and understanding, it's divided into 2 areas. One is research outputs, of which there has to be 2.5 per individual. And it's also requires the unit of assessment to provide a disciplinary level evidence statement. So you can see here that when it comes to the outputs, they can contribute up to 90% of the 50%, the overall 50%, as you've seen from a previous slide for CKU. And the criteria are originality, significance, and rigor. And they'll be looking at things like universities will focus on things like open access, etc., for those particular outputs. When it comes to disciplinary level statements, this contributes up to 10 or at least 10% of the score. So at least 10% of that, 50%. Again, I hope you're following me. And this shows the statement will be about what is the broader contribution of this unit of assessment to knowledge within the discipline beyond the outputs that were returned. And you may want to be discussing research integrity, research replication or reproducibility, your open research practices. And as I said, there's no longer a focus on individuals, there'll be a focus on the discipline and on the unit of assessment. And this statement will to some extent stop universities buying in big hitters. So let's say you needed 50 outputs for 20 people, and you brought, you hired, in the mouth of REF 2029, you hired 5 big hitters, and those 5 big hitters produced all of the 50 outputs. And the other 15 people in that unit of assessment didn't return any. Now, this disciplinary level statement will pick that up, because if the unit of assessment is covering quite a broad range of research topics, you will be able to identify that within the disciplinary level statement. The reviewer will be able to look at that and then look at the outputs and see how the outputs match or differ from what the disciplinary focus of the unit of assessment is. Okay, so let's move on now to engagement and impact. So definition of impact. When I think of impact, I think of an effect, change, or benefit. So what was the benefit of your research? Did it have a benefit on processes such as practices or performance or interventions? Did it have a benefit on people like patients or family members or community members or individuals in particular? Did it have a benefit, effect, or a change on places? Was there a change locally or regionally or nationally or internationally? So that's a definition of impact for REF 2021, and my understanding is that's not changed for 2029. There were 2 criteria that we used in previous exercises to judge impact case studies. That was reach and significance. People still think that reach has to do with geography. It doesn't. You can get 4-star impact case studies in a part of Scotland, a part of Wales, the north of England, the south of England, Northern Ireland. It's not about geography. It's about the number of beneficiaries that your research is able to reach. The significance is you may have a great reach, but what has changed? What has enriched? What has influenced? So if you take an example of public engagement, I could go at a conference and speak to, I don't know, 1,000 people in an auditorium, and that you might say that that reach is excellent. It's very, very high. I would score well in reach, especially if those were the beneficiaries for the research that I was talking about. But what was the significance of my presentation? What changed? Who benefited? What, who was influenced? Who was better informed? So just having reach without significance. And we look at them around, we look at reach and significance together. We don't look at them separately. But you need to obviously see how well you're doing in both reach and significance. In 2029, they're talking about introducing a new criterion, which is rigor. I'll come to that in a moment. Now, this may or may not happen. I don't know. They're still in discussions, but let's look at it as if it's going to happen. Uh, Here are the criteria. You'll notice here that for impact, it's not about we're leading, internationally recognized, nationally recognized. It's about outstanding, considerable. It's about some impact. It's about limited impact. And again, no prizes for guessing that 4-star and 3-star will score more when it comes to money for your impact case study. There is some research which I can share with you that shows that an impact case study is worth about £1/3 of £1 million. A 4-star impact case study, £1/3 of £1 million each between one ref and the next ref. Remember, it's 5 to 7 years between refs. So when it comes to QR income, if you've got a 4-star impact case study, it can be worth up to £1/3 of £1 million between refs to a university or to a unit of assessment. So it's a big deal. The scale at the bottom for impacts, we tend to use 0.51, 1.52, as opposed to the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star. So we break it down into, if you like, fractions. Okay, hopefully that's useful. So rigor and engagement. Well, it's possible, and we've seen it in previous exercises where researchers undertook a study, they produced papers, they spoke at conferences, and then they got another grant and moved on to another study. And they had nothing whatsoever to do with impact. Maybe somebody came along and listened to their conference presentation or read their article in a journal and said that could change practice or that could change manufacturing processes or whatever, and that they did that and there was impact, but the academic member staff may not have been involved in actually making that impact happen. So there was no engagement. And here in 2029, there's a greater emphasis on engagement. And how do you engage and when do you engage to ensure that impact happens? So really, rigor is the quality and appropriateness of the processes through which that engagement takes place so that impact is achieved. This could involve what kind of partnerships were involved, when did the engagement happen, who was involved in the partnership, what were the ethical considerations of the engagement if there were conflicts of interest or if there was commercial interests, and what methods were used to engage so that impact would happen. So I would say to my researchers, if they're doing research, I would say you need to ask yourself 3 questions before you start a study. First question is, if I did this study, what are the potential impacts if I did this research investigation? That's my first question. Second question you should ask yourself is, who will the beneficiaries be of that impact? Will it be patients, families? Will it be communities? Will it be hospital staff? Who are the beneficiaries? That's the second question. And the third question is, how do I engage with those beneficiaries at an earliest stage possible so that I travel with them on the journey towards impact, that they're either part of my team or they're part of an advisory group working alongside the research team. So rigor, let's see where that goes when the final decisions are made about REF 2029, but engagement and impact is here to stay. Some changes since 2021. There's been a change in the number of impact case studies needed for the number of people in your submission, and I'll come to that in greater detail in a moment. In 2014, the narrative about how you encourage impact within your school or within your department or in your unit of assessment, in 2014, there was an impact and there was that narrative. In 2021, that narrative disappeared and went into environment. That's now back in 2029 alongside impact. So there's a reintroduction of that statement of evidence that I mentioned earlier on. There's a minimum weighting of 20% for the engagement and impact part of the narrative. Again, I'll show you what that means shortly. In 2021, the research underpinning impact had to be at least of 2-star quality. In other words, internationally recognized. That is now gone in 2029. So we're expecting more diverse research outputs underpinning impact. Could be research reports, it could be portfolios. I'm not sure. Let's see what we get. There's new criteria, as I said, around engagement. And also in 2029, you can return an impact case study to more than one unit of assessment. So let's say you as a nurse or AHP, you were working with engineers on smart homes and you work closely with them in the research. The engineers could return that impact case study to unit of assessment 12, which engineering, and you could return it to unit of assessment 3. Now, if that is rated as 4-star, then that university is going to get 1/3 of a million from you and 1/3 of a million from engineering. So 2/3 of a million for that one 4-star impact case study because it was returned to more than one unit of assessment within REF. So that's allowed now in 2029. But of course, the research underpinning that must match the descriptor for the unit of assessment that has been returned to. And the descriptor will be different in engineering as it would be in unit of assessment 3. The portability. If you leave, let's say you're working an impact case study and it's 4-star, it's really, really strong, and you leave in 2027 and you move to another university, you cannot take your impact case study with you. It belongs to the university where the research was undertaken. And there's other shades to that, which I can talk at some stage if we ever meet in the future. But in essence, impact case studies are non-portable. The new criteria of rigor is I've already touched on. Okay, let's now look at the number of impact case studies required. So in the past, in 2021, for in a small unit up to 9.99 staff, you needed 2 impact case studies. That's no longer the case. You now only need 1. And you can see here that the number of staff returned in a particular unit will determine the number of impact case studies. And as I said already, alongside that impact case study is this sort of evidence statement, this narrative for one, that the percentage of that narrative is 50%. That's 50% of the 25% overall for impact and engagement. And it goes down to 20% as you return more staff and more impact case studies. Okay, so just to summarize then, engagement and impact, you have impact case studies, and number will be related to the volume measure of staff going to be returned. It's come down from a 2 for a small unit to 1 for a small unit, and it can contribute, as you've seen there, 50 to 80% of the engagement and impact score. And there's no quality threshold of 2-star underpinning the research. That's gone. The disciplinary level statement, you can see what it's worth there. And that's about what is the contribution of the unit to impact, not necessarily reflected in the impact case studies. How does your unit of assessment, how does your department, your school encourage the development of impact? How do you, how does it support you to engage so that impact will happen? Okay, let's go to PCE. PCE is people, culture, and environment. So this has increased, as you've seen, from 15 to 25%. And I believe that sends a very strong message out there to universities to say that culture and research culture is important. Because if you want to produce high quality research outputs and impact, you need to have an inclusive research culture. And very many in that middle section, you see very many reports and research organizations have been pushing this for a long time. And in the EU, you now have CORA, which is the coalition for the advancement of research assessment, CORA. And it now has, last time I looked, it's about 800 members. And that means organizations signed up to it, including, last time I looked, 12 universities from the UK. So if your university hasn't signed up to CORA, it may be something you want to think about. Because if you look at CORA and REF 2029, there are lots of similarities when it comes to PCE. So it shows 2029's intention to change the emphasis on the performance of individuals. There's less now for outputs. Going back to the early stages of research assessment in the UK, publications were worth about 70%. Now they're down to less than 50%. So that tells you there's less emphasis on publish and perish and more emphasis on research culture and integrity and inclusiveness. So there's still the two criteria we used before, vitality and sustainability. And you can look at these at your leisure. But that's the definition of vitality on the left. And on the right, we have the sustainability. So your research culture, your environment, your people strategy, there should be vitality there, but also it needs to be sustainable over time. And rigor is a new criterion that's also been looked at when it comes to PCA. And let's see if it stays there up until your submission in 2028. The rigor here is the extent to which the higher education institution has robust, effective, and meaningful mechanisms and processes for supporting the highest quality research outputs, empowering staff and research students. And this includes good practices in learning and sharing innovation, robust evaluation, honest reflection, demonstrating a willingness to learn from experience. So that's rigor. And when it comes to PCE, we're back to the world leading, internationally excellent, internationally recognized, and nationally recognized that we've seen in the outputs, with an emphasis here not on outputs, but on culture. So just two definitions of culture for you. The one that REF has been particularly interested in is the first one from the Royal Society. At the exact same time, almost serendipitously, there was a definition of research culture produced by Science Europe. And I don't think they spoke to each other, but you can see the similarity between these two. I prefer the second one, mainly because it's more detailed when it talks about collaboration, equality, diversity, inclusion, integrity, openness, transparency, which are implied in the first one. So we know, and I wrote a paper in 2023, and I identified a toxic research culture is about bullying, harassment, poor employment terms and conditions, inadequate equality, diversity and integration practices, breaches of research integrity, and almost a pathological pursuit of higher league table positions, H indices and impact factors. I think REF 2029 and CORA and other research assessment exercises across the world are beginning to recognize this and are saying we need to change the research culture from being toxic to being a high quality, inclusive research culture. So in PCE, You're going to reward those that create a positive research culture, nurture the research. It will have a positive impact on groups and protected characteristics that you're all familiar with of vulnerable individuals and groups. And it follows a more tightly defined questionnaire style template. Not sure what this will look like because there's a pilot exercise going on at the moment. And in here too, let's say, go back to that example I used earlier on, where of the 20 people, 5 produced all of the 50 outputs. Here you would have to say within your research culture, tell us about your unit of assessment, tell us about your department, your school, your research units. And if that was not in line with what was returned and output, you begin to say, well, why? So REF outputs, impact, and culture are joined up. Metrics to assess PCE will be accompanied by a narrative. So Rebecca Fairburn, who is the lead person on REF 2029, she said it's not going to be all about questionnaire. There'll be qualitative narratives also encouraged within the PCE. Okay, so this was produced before the change from 28 to 29, but the same things apply. The people, culture, and environment element will be assessed at 2 levels: the disciplinary level, unit of assessment, department, school, if you like, and the university level, institutional level. The institutional statement will constitute 20% of that 25% overall for PCE, meaning that the disciplinary level will constitute about 80%. Okay, so for PCE, the university has to produce a statement, and the unit assessment department school has to produce a statement. There's a pilot exercise going on, and they decided to look at 2 units of assessment from main panel A. That's the first 2 you see there, including the one that you're most interested in. 2 from panel B, computing and business management. 2 from, earth science and computer management. 2 from panel C, business and social work. 2 from panel D, history and music, etc. And this pilot exercise should report anytime soon. It's already appointed different panels to assess. So not only have we got 40 universities involved in the pilots across the UK, there's 8 panels now put together to assess the submissions from this pilot, and we'll know more as we go into May and August, and hopefully in September, if all goes according to plan, there'll be publication of the pilot report, and we'll know more about PCA and what it's going to look at and what we can measure and what we can't measure when it comes to culture, and the balance between qualitative narrative and more quantitative questionnaire. So to summarize PCE, as I said, you have this institutional level and you have a disciplinary level, and the institutional level is at least 20%, and the level at the unit of assessment or school will be 80%. Some further work has to be done based on the results of the pilot, which we don't know yet. So research diversity, just want to finish on this. Many reports have been coming out focusing on the importance of research diversity. I'll give you a definition for that in a moment. But research doesn't tend to be too diverse, and you'll see that in a couple of slides time. But all of these very important reports, government issued reports in some instances, some research projects have come out saying we need to encourage more diversity. And this is not just diversity when it comes to publications, outputs, but also diversity in your methodologies you use, in the institutions that are returned to REF, in the people, in the activities that people carry out, and in impacts. So a definition for diversity. So for the purpose of REF, research diversity refers to enabling and recognizing excellence in the widest possible range of research practices, outputs, engagement approaches, and impacts. It also includes recognition of the research culture, environments that enable epistemological I can't say that. It enables diverse and equitable production, validation, sharing, and use of knowledge. So here's some outputs that recognize diversity in outputs. You can see that I've highlighted journal articles. 99.2% of every output that was returned in subpanel 3, which is the one that you're probably interested in, was a journal article. We've seen next to none of the others. We've seen some book chapters, we've seen some books, but in the main, this whole rich pattern of diverse outputs we don't see. Why is that the case? Are they there, but they're just not returned or submitted by the university, by your university? So we're not suggesting that people go out there and start producing diverse outputs. We're suggesting that if you have diverse outputs, this should be included or considered for inclusion in REF 2029. Diverse when it comes to impact and engagement, and this refers to the breadth of reach that we're talking about when it comes to impact. And engagement practice and comfort encompass the different interactions that you have across a wide range of audiences, partners, in multiple settings, and multiple and various channels. And REF 29 will enable institutions to hopefully submit a wider range of impacts and a wider range of research underpinning the impacts. Here's some impacts. And we see a lot in health. So if you look at the unit of assessment that you're interested in, which is subpanel 3, we've seen a lot of impacts when it came to quality of life, when it came to health, when it came to well-being, when it came to understanding learning. Some on policy. We didn't see a huge amount. In fact, I don't think we've seen any on the economy, impacts relating to the economy. We didn't see any when it came to technology. We didn't see any when it came to production. So there's again a diverse, rich range of impacts out there that we don't see when it comes to Unit Assessment 3. Hopefully that will change in 2029. So let's look at diversity when it comes to PCE. This may include strategies aimed at inclusiveness, integrity, ethical practices, when it comes to reproducibility of research, which is a big problem when it comes to research. A lot of research funded to a great extent by government and by research councils. A lot of it can't be reproduced for some reason. So that's a big worry for funding organizations and for governments. So replication, reproducibility is becoming more and more important. And what about responsible practice? So hopefully we'll see a wide range of diverse evidence for people, culture, and environment. So that's me finished. That's a cook's tour of REF 2029 and the state of play when it comes to April 2025. There's still a lot that we don't know. We'll wait until the PCE pilot is complete and hopefully reporting back in September. There's still some policy documents to be produced by Research England when it comes to engagement and impact, and also CKU, contribution to knowledge and understanding. I'd be very pleased to speak to you at a future date, be better in person because I'd like to get some questions from you. But if not, I hope this has been of interest. Thank you very much.